We can head to Mexico City now and speak to the journalist and author Ioan Grilllo. Great to have you on the programme. Thank you very much for your time. Clearly, he is a big figure, but what will be the impact of his arrest?
So in terms of actually stopping drug trafficking, tragically, this likely won't have a big effect. Although he's very, very famous and one of the most infamous drug traffickers in Mexico and the world, really his heyday was the 1980s, when they raided the biggest marijuana plantation ever belonging to him. And now he's, since he managed to likely bribe a judge to get out of prison, he's been more of a minor player in actual trafficking itself. And there's many other players out there. So unfortunately, the fentanyl, the crystal meth, the heroin, the cocaine that comes through Mexico will continue. On the other side, in terms of American-Mexican relations, this is very important. When you talk to DEA agents, the first person they ask about always is Caro Quintero. They were furious when he was released in 2013. In the DEA offices, they have these pictures of Kiki Camarena. He's a martyr for their agency. And they put $20 million out for awards. So this is really cementing. And there's a certain kind of cold period between the current Mexican president and Washington, and the idea of he wouldn't let DEA agents work here. And this is really repairing those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, it was really personal, wasn't it, this for the DEA?
Absolutely. I mean, this is, it was not only a guy who was, murdered, he was tortured. There was tapes of him being tortured. He was very, very heavily beaten. And his body was left there. And there was a lot of corruption in Mexico at the time. There's also many players. So this was a real grudge they were going after. Now, another thing is that today, as your report said, he was also fighting some quite gruesome turf wars in the northern Mexico. I've been working a lot this last year in Sonora State, and that became a bit of a fiefdom for Caro Quintero. And he was fighting very much there. Other cartel members loyal to the sons of the drug lord El Chapo. It became one of the most violent states in Mexico, some very horrific gun battles. So maybe this arrest will try and reduce that violence in Sonora State as well, although there's still many players fighting over this billions of dollars in trafficking wealth.
Yeah, I mean, the arrest happened shortly after President Biden met with the president of Mexico. Coincidence?
Very hard to see a complete coincidence in this. I mean, right before this visit, and as I said, there'd been a slight cold relationship, and there was criticism of Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador not really attacking drug cartels, allowing them to operate, not really going after them. He had this famous phrase called "hugs, not bullets," referring to the drug war. And then when he went before this meeting, there was suddenly a bunch of very significant busts, including the biggest bust ever, the biggest seizure ever of fentanyl. Now, fentanyl is an opioid, it's a substitute for heroin, and that is really driving a lot of the deaths, the overdose deaths in the United States. Last year, you saw more than 100,000 overdose deaths in the United States, and fentanyl was the biggest killer, most of it coming through Mexico. Now, this is mind-boggling numbers if you think about the amount of death happening for this. So a lot of pressure inside the United States to pressure Mexico to do this, and then suddenly 3 days after the meeting, you see the arrest of Caro Quintero. Now, this brings up the question, did the Mexican government know where he was all the time and just go and get him? Or was there new information that came to them in recent days that allowed them to make this arrest in the north of Sinaloa?
Well, it sounds like there's enough in another book for you there, just answering some of those questions. And what about these 14 people killed in a Navy Black Hawk helicopter crash during the operation? Is the thinking that this was a simple accident, or could it have been something more sinister?
I mean, it could certainly be something more sinister. Now, the helicopter crash was near the port of Mochis, the seaside town of Mochis, pretty close to where Caro Quintero was taken. It looked like it was involved in the operation. Now, could it just suddenly crash, leaving the operation, or was it shot down or sabotaged? In the past, cartels have shot down Mexican helicopters. There was a famous incident in 2015 where they shot one down with an RPG-7. Now, as well as the 14 dead, there's one person survived. And I had the chance to speak to some of the people who survived the previous 2015 helicopter crash. They were living with very severe burns. So also, this is very costly, the cost of this drug war, for Mexican forces. I mean, there's one police officer shot every day in Mexico right now. So it's very, very costly for the country in terms of the deaths happening involved with this drug war.
Yeah, Quintero's story dramatised, of course, in the Narcos series in 2018. Was it a pretty accurate portrayal, do you think?
It's TV, it's dramatic TV, and obviously the first season of Narcos Mexico was precisely about this agent, Kiki Camarena. It had an actor playing Caro Quintero. It had the massive marijuana plantation. So a lot of the facts are there. Now, obviously, I've spent 21 years covering this as a journalist, you start to see a lot of holes and inaccuracies, and you can see little things. And one thing about the series, it does very much, I would say, glamorize the kind of high life of these drug traffickers, the big players, when really a lot of the time the traffickers I speak to, the sicarios, the killers that I speak to, are often living quite brutal lives, quite hard lives around death, around regret. And then most of them are not living these big, big riches that the few elite of the drug cartel capos, the leaders, are really living.
It's been fascinating talking to you, Ioan. Just before we let you go, do you ever worry about your safety writing about these drug lords, investigating them?
I mean, absolutely. I think anybody who spends a lot of time doing this, worries about this. Mexico has been one of the worst places in the world for journalists. I've had, 2 people I've worked with who have been killed, including one good friend, Javi Valdez, who was murdered in 2017. Most of the people who have died have been Mexican nationals. But at the same time, you can never feel you're immune to this. There have been plenty of foreigners who have been here, have been killed for just being in the wrong place at the wrong time. So certainly a concern. At the same time, it's a very, very important story. I think it's a very important story to understand the violence happening in Mexico, the violence happening in Latin America, and how this could also spread to other countries around the world.
Yeah, it's been fascinating hearing you describe events out there. Ioan Grilllo, stay safe, and thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thanks much.